Hi, I'm Kerry Fortner, and this is my video presentation for Autism Spectrum Disorders, Class 512 for master's degree. The three different technologies that I chose that really relate to my practice in working with kids with disabilities are number one, I chose the video camera, which is called a GoPro, which I actually have an attachment that can be put on my hat. And the reason that I chose the GoPro video is that we've begun to, at the school I'm at, it's my first year, to use the video presentation, or use the video to actually do assessments. Assessments possibly mostly have been, I'm about to do one in the COMS for someone with a spinal cord injury, and then I've used the TGMD and also the APPEASE 2, which are all geared towards finding the baseline of different skills for students with disabilities. The goals that these are related to are actually all the 5 standards in some way, shape, or form that all 5 California state standards, the overreaching standards. The standards are deal with aerobic endurance, flexibility, locomotor skills, balance, and then object control skills. The thing that I think was so good about doing this presentation is that I did a training probably about 3 months ago for iPads. Some of our autistic kids that had a long lag time for being able to respond, and then we have some kids that are nonverbal. So we use the iPads that are similar to the old PEC boards, except that they actually can take, and we can put icons up that, for example, might have a flexibility like a stretching exercise or a locomotor skill. And what we are working on doing right now is actually taking the assessment, whether it be triennial or the annual assessment that we've been doing on a lot of our kids, and we can transfer those skills, or actually when I demonstrate for the kids before they do the skill, we can transfer that information over to the iPad, and within the iPad we can actually program an icon. For example, if we're playing soccer and we want to teach, which is one of the overreaching standards, teach strategy, offensive, defensive strategy, or kicking a ball, or a soccer ball, or throwing a wiffle ball, or playing dodgeball, it doesn't really matter. We can actually have an icon. And another thing from doing the study on the social aspect of it, what we discovered is I think 6 out of the 9 of my autistic kids all have a base language or a language that's spoken at home of Mandarin, Mandarin, Cantonese. I have a Korean. I have Spanish speakers. I have a Russian speaker. They do speak English, but I've been working with the OT, occupational therapist, and the speech and language pathologist has been a great help, because she's begun to use the iPads too for the kids that have trouble speaking or putting sentences together. And what we're going to do, she just went through a training, and we're both going through a training this summer, where we can put an icon up, we can have it there in English. There's a picture, because we know that research tells us that most of these kids learn visually. We can have a picture that is there with whatever language they speak in and English. For example, if it said kick It could be in Russian or Cantonese and also in English. So this is working together, and we're working with some of the other special education teachers because we found out in this research study something very interesting, and I think this would be good for me to read. This is in my introduction on my paper, is that assistive technology, this comes from IDEA, assistive technology, according to the Technology Related Assistance for Individual Act of 1988, Public Law 100-4070, assistive technology device means any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, off-the-shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. In 1997 and in 2004, this definition remained unchanged. IDA in 2004 added an exception that states, assistive technology service is any service that directly assists an individual with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. These definitions were incorporated into the IDA in 1990 and remain in today. In addition, IDA 2004 continued the requirement that each public agency shall ensure that assistive technology services are made available to a child with a disability if required. What that means is that we're working through a company called PRC, and they actually, these devices that we're going to be using for the kids are actually going to be paid for by the state. A lot of our kids are live in group homes. They're basically wards of the state, and it's really exciting for us to be able to get this type of technology, because the expense, a lot of times people look at it and they go, wow, the expense is too great to use. What we found through this study, and me working collaboratively with special ed teachers too, is that our kids that really need this are able to get it, and it's going to be paid for. So I thought that was pretty cool. So we have, I use the GoPro or a video camera, which is being recording me right now, to actually record assessments. And then for the kids that either qualify or we think it will be helpful for them, then we can transfer that information over to the iPad and build a touch screen for the kids so that they can better communicate. And of course, with autistic kids, we know that visually they learn things a lot quicker. And a lot of times too, especially it's important for us in adaptive physical education, because we might be doing a skill or playing a game, and sometimes it takes 10 to 20 seconds for our students who know what to do, but for them to process the skill that we're trying to attempt. And what we're finding, because we also already have one young lady that is using the iPad, is that she's her reading level has come up. Some people say that, well, they don't like these types of devices because the kids stop speaking. Well, her language skills have come up. This came up in her IEP about a month ago. So we're really excited about this. The other piece of technology that we can use from the assessment is basically a voice operated. There's software from PRC, many different companies. Apple has this type of software where we can, there's a couple different options for it, but the kids that are completely nonverbal, and I did get a chance to use this one time in another school that I did an internship with, where the child or the young man was actually very bright, but he was completely nonverbal, and but he could type into a computer. He could use a computer to for self-directed educational purposes. He was on track as a 16-year-old, I think in the 9th or 10th grade, and but he took me to a room, and the speech and language therapist was in there, and he started typing in, and I asked him questions, and I said, you know, what sport do you like? And he was actually able to type in baseball, just BAS, because it was actually programmed for him, and the word came baseball. And then I asked him what team he liked the best, and he was able to type it in very quickly. It was kind of funny because he was actually playing a video game on an iPad while he was typing in and having a conversation with me. But I think the neat part about that is that this young man now has a voice. And for some of the kids that we actually have another student that we're working with, and I saw in my research where this is fairly common, that he's 17 years old, but he has favorite shows and he watches them over and over again. And so they can actually program his voice with different responses to questions to where you can build his own little database, which helps him relate to what he's saying instead of just repeating something. So that was pretty cool. So those are the three technologies that the way we would use the assessment video also is, for example, when we're doing locomotor skills, like before we play dodgeball, we have to skip up to the line before we get the Nerf ball, or slide, or do some type of locomotor skill, and then overhand throw, and things of that nature. Well, we can program that in with icons, and the one-on-one aid can be there, and when they hear it, they can touch the iPad and it'll actually show them, like for instance, another thing would be one of the big things with a lot of the autistic kids is bilateral coordination or balance. So it can either just be a picture that when they put on that tab, and their whole screen now is full of adaptive or physical education skills, but they push on the screen and it'll show someone doing a jumping jack, and you can actually add instruction on there too, and their lag time from the time when we start that skill to when they end it or they begin it has gone from, in some cases to 2 or 3 seconds or almost immediately, because they're starting to remember. And then remember too, the words are right below the icon or the demonstrations, and that can also be operated. It's pretty noisy, but it also can have a voice that's explaining what the skill may be. Another thing that I thought was really good is that we know that the kids are, most of the autistic kids are visual. So this plays right into a great strategy for helping them to become learners. And then, so it is really a visual system. The sensory input, when I was reading about the sensory input, it really brought to my mind some of the incidents that I've had. For example, you have an autistic student and you're in the gymnasium, and then all of a sudden he attacks another student, or he attacks one of the aides, or even one of the teachers, and sensory overload. What I discovered after a couple of times is I thought about it, and from beginning to really understand, I've been doing this is my second year now, the noise in the gym. There were big industrial fans that were up there. So we're even looking at putting an icon when they're in the gymnasium or outside, because if the big garbage trucks come when we're out on the football field, you can actually see these kids escalate and the sensory overload begin to kick in, to where these kids can tell us, and some of them have the earphones that they can put on their ears to kind of take away that noise. So it really plays into educating them on the sensory side. assisted technology for motor skills acquisition. I think I've been through that, but a lot of these kids have trouble with motor skills. The ones we've just seen leaps and bounds with the one young lady, and we're in the process of going through the acquisition and building an iPad that is voice operated for a young man that speaks almost all Spanish, and we're really excited about that because the speech and language pathologist thinks that it will really help him with his speech and language acquisition. And remember, anything in there you can have in his home language and English, which I mean, it really, the iPad can be used for reading, writing, arithmetic, and sports, not sports activity, but physical education activities. AT for receptive communication. We know that a lot of times the kids' language gets slowed down, especially if they're in a bigger group. Sometimes I have 15 to 20 APE kids, and it's really tough on my autistic kids. But we've seen with the one young lady that has it right now, like I said before, that's real slowdown in lag time. There are a lot of different, they're called IntelliTools. You can see that in my paper. I wrote down a lot of different names and different companies. But the PRC company that has been in and done some training for our teachers seems to be the route to go for us because, as I said before, we have some students that, you give them an iPad and it'll be broken the next day. Well, they have these medical, they classify them as medical tools, and it's the same type of iPad that our military would be using in a foreign country. They're almost unbreakable. So, and they can be programmed to do just about anything that we wanted to do. And one thing that I wanted to mention too, that what we have seen with the kids, because this one young man, he had a pegboard and he kind of destroyed it, but we're in the process of getting him an iPad, is when he could communicate, his behavior issues were much, almost non-existent. And I also found too, I have a lot of Nerf balls. If I put a Nerf ball in their hand while we're doing different types of exercises where they don't need their hands or they stay occupied, they seem to stay more focused. So we've seen, and 3 of our kids actually have ABA specialists that pretty much track the function of their behavior, and there have been some of the people that we've collaborated with to help these kids get some higher technology. And one thing that I've learned from this class and this research, and also in my curriculum development class, is the whole socialization and social part of it. We're looking at ways to possibly put something on the PEC board to where they can respond, because we really try to be positive in the class. Besides gesturally, if someone does something good, not a requirement, but what we try to teach them is clap for them or do something that shows them that they've done a good job. So for some of the kids that are nonverbal, we'd like to have the ability for them to learn how to socialize with other kids, not just autistic kids, but other kids in the school. So we see a great opportunity on the social side. That's it. As I said, all overreaching skills, which is the main skill of physical education, is these kids can find something that they can do for a lifetime that they enjoy, and so that they can stay healthy and physically fit for the rest of their lives. Thank you, and I look forward to your response. Ethan! Ethan!
Yeah?
Can you turn it off?
What? Press the red button.
It's dark. I don't have my new.